Hello, greetings to everyone, and welcome to the next episode of our Lviv International Talks by Tvoye Misto, or your city media hub. And today we will talk about tech, about Ukraine, about US-Ukraine relations, and about many other good things with our great distinguished guests. We have today Deborah Fairlamp and Justin Zief, who are the founders of Green Flag Ventures, the firm that was just launched officially yesterday during Lviv IT Arena. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You worked, both of you have experience in some experience in government. You have in Ukraine, it was Ukrainian government. Justin has experience with American government. What was your reason to specifically focus on tech? Because you had a good experience with Ukraine Invest, was as in the leading positions at Ukraine Invest, at Ukrainian Startup Funds and Tech Ukraine. Does it mean that you see the biggest potential now in Ukrainian tech when we speak about startups specifically?
So my background actually is more private sector. I actually sort of had started my sector in investments and business development. So that's kind of the default to where I believe economic growth comes from. Governments absolutely play a role in certain spaces, but to my mind, it is the private sector where growth comes from. It's where people's individual freedom, possibilities, whatnot, grow from. So the time that I had spent consulting for the government of Ukraine, there were very specific projects, very much aimed at bringing investments into the country. Ukraine Invest, it was more foreign direct investment, but the startup fund was sort of something new. And the idea actually had come at the time. Prime Minister Groisman had done a trip to Israel, and he came back and he said the Israelis, the government invested in in the Israeli startup ecosystem 20 years ago, early on. We want to have some kind of an investment vehicle that the government can sort of use to jumpstart the ecosystem. That's actually where one of the origins of this idea. And it was narrow enough in terms of what they were trying to do. It really was, small grants out to carefully vetted companies or startups that were being judged by a jury, I'll call it of their peers, but independent advisors, so there was no possibility of corruption. But what it did was put infusion out into the tech ecosystem. And it was during my time, particularly with that project, that I really sort of became aware of the broader spectrum of the ecosystem that was out there. And it in addition to kind of the more broad things that people might think about. So it was just completely across the board. And quite frankly, there is such a dynamic energy in the tech ecosystem, and it is not only young people driving it. There are absolutely folks in their 40s and their 50s who would come out of kind of the more science, engineering, technology background out of the Soviet Union, who have sort of led the way in terms of this. So it's a great balance of knowledge, youthful energy, and a desire to create their own future through companies that they themselves are building.
And now, Justin, you had different experiences. You worked a lot in the private sector, and you came to tech. You founded Nisos in 2014, yeah. Mm-hmm. And why do you also decided to focus on Ukraine?
Yeah. I love the question because I love the answer, to be honest. And I'm proud to give it, so I like giving it as often as I can. Bit of context background, I started, as you mentioned, started Nisos in 2014, and our objective, it's a managed intelligence firm, right? So our objective is to help large enterprise and really any clients who need it to defend themselves against groups, generally not from a specific country, but groups nonetheless, who are seeking to cause damage to a reputation or to your financial position or something like that. And we found ourselves working a lot in the election disinformation space. And so over the years, we've been very fortunate to solve problems like, who are the groups in country X that are working together to spread disinformation across the world. And I've always been a big believer in if someone once asked me, why was it so important to you to start a company that had a big mission, right? And my answer was like, I was surprised by the question. I'm like, why would you start a company that doesn't? Like, so like, why, you know, I'm a lazy person inherently by nature. And if I don't have something to stand up and fight for that really matters, it's hard for me to get motivated.
Is it the same with Ukraine?
Yeah, sort of. I didn't know anything about Ukraine before I came here the first time. My good friend, Edward Marshall, who's a great champion of Ukraine, convinced me to come and volunteer in April of last year. So I showed up for 3 weeks to drive medical supplies around from, you know, wherever they had been collected from donations overseas, and drive them to the field hospitals or the clinics, you know, a bit outside of Kyiv, places where you go, you drop your supplies off, and you get out.
It was Help Ukraine 22.
Yep,
Okay.
it was with Help Ukraine 22, a great organization. And I didn't know anything about Ukraine before that. I came, I saw something that provoked a lot of different emotions in me, both towards Ukraine, the world, and my own country. I am still a firm believer in the concept of American exceptionalism, which is different from the idea that the United States is better than other countries. It's that the United States has a unique position and opportunity, and therefore, in my opinion, responsibility to support the world and democracies when and where we can. And so I believe that. And, you know, I came here, and I met Ukrainians, and I had not really had any day-to-day interaction with them. And, you know, I also served, during my time in government, I served full deployments in both Iraq and Afghanistan. So I've spent time on the ground in conflict zones. And I didn't realize until I came here that you could be in a conflict zone and still care about self-determination and independence and freedom in a way that was more than, we just want the bullets to stop, or we just want the shells to stop, which there's nothing wrong with wanting, you know, violence to stop. But you can go further. You can decide that collectively you and your society can decide how your future looks and what kind of rights you have, and that you protect for others. And I never saw that in those places. I didn't see that desire, that drive among the people. And I came here, and, you know, first stop was Lviv, and I made my way to, you know, Kyiv, and from there to other places. And in everywhere I went, it felt like what I imagined the United States felt like a week after Pearl Harbor, right? It was fierce patriotism without the jingoistic element of patriotism for the sake of we're better than you, right? It was just, we're together in this. We are not going to give up. And if you'll support us, we will take it, and we need it. And I felt it. And, you know, I do a lot of things based on how they make me feel. And I felt like this was something important. And so, and I was here, and I have 2 little kids at home, and 2 boys, Simon and Elliot. And I'm a big believer in acta non verba, deeds, not words. And so you can, all day long, you can change your LinkedIn or Facebook picture to have the Ukrainian flag behind your head. But are you helping? Or are you just demonstrating that you totally would help if you had the chance, right? And so I said, I gotta go do this. And so that was what drove me to come, but it's not what drove me to come back, right? So I met several tech entrepreneurs when I was in Kyiv, and it was clear to me there was something there. And I went back home, and I spent probably 8 months making phone calls and having conversations with people in the ecosystem, and trying to provide value just to help. You know, I met people who said, if I had a contact at this organization, I could do so much more, or I could help, or they could really use my product. And from Nisos, really, we only sell into large enterprise organizations. So my ability to call somebody at a major Fortune 500 or a publicly traded company and to leverage the trust that I've built with those people over time, having worked with them through NISOs, meant that I could put a deck in front of them, or I could put a connection in front of them and say, hey, this organization needs some support. They don't need, a donation. They don't need a handout. They just need a conversation. They can prove themselves. They just need that introduction. And so I started doing a lot of that, and I was like, I knew I wanted to get into venture investing, and that all came together.
So you both have a big mission here, but also you have, I think, big plans for what's your venture capital firm will be doing here, except this big mission to help Ukraine. What do you see? Where do you see the biggest perspectives for, and what are you going to do as a venture capital firm?
You want to start?
Sure. I have many different feelings on the subject, and some of them conflict with others because I worry. I try to be very, very transparent in how I feel in most conversations, whenever I can. And part of me wants to, stand up in the United States and say, this is not a humanitarian, are there humanitarian issues? Yes, support is still needed. The opportunity and the benefit and the value that will derive to Ukraine and to the people who are supporting is in economic involvement, right? The more economic relationships we develop between our countries, both the United States and Ukraine and other democratic countries around the world, the less likely it is that there will be conflict. And, Russia knows this, right? It's probably not a coincidence that when they invaded Crimea in 2014, that the Ukrainian government was in mid to late stage conversations with Shell and a few other large multinational oil companies to develop, land in the Black Sea, because Russia knew once an American oil company or a Dutch oil company is set up shop, they can't, it'd be much more difficult to invade because other countries are going to have a quiet conversation with them about the problems that would cause, right? And so they, decided to harm this economic opportunity for Ukraine. I think most people in the United States don't understand that the reason we should be supporting Ukraine, if you can't wrap your head around the need to help another democracy, you just don't care, you're tired of it. We sold this to the American people that this is what we were doing in Iraq. We sold this is what we're doing in Afghanistan. We did that in neither place. And I'm partially to blame for that. And it needs to be a different story here. This is not a place, this is not Darfur, this is not Somalia, this is not Kosovo, right? This is a very different situation. It's a democracy that just is under attack in Europe, and something probably many people would not have seen coming, 10 years ago. And we need to build those economic bridges. And I see a tremendous amount of opportunity to do very well as an investor here by doing good.
Do you agree that it might be the tactics or strategy of Russians that they changed recently, that when they started hitting a little bit other targets with their missiles in the recent weeks? So they target many manufacturers, many companies, or warehouses of the companies based both by Ukrainian, founded both by Ukrainian and European or American investors. Is it something that they may be trying to hit this autumn and winter?
I certainly have no idea what's in the Russians' heads, and I definitely don't know what's in their ammunition storage depot, right? My guess is that they have very few weapons that can target with precision, and that they're just lobbing something over and hoping that it hits something within, a 2-kilometer radius. But are they targeting a specific factory or an industry or building? I don't know. But would they seek to damage the interest and opportunity for foreign direct investment into Ukraine by sending the message to prospective investors that it's not safe to do that? Yeah, that's certainly something they could do. I don't know whether that's what they are doing. But in any event, much of, if not most of, the intellectual property and the innovation that's taking place here ultimately ends up in the cloud, and you can't bomb the cloud. So I'm not overly concerned with that, right? Like if we were investing in motorcycle factories, that might be something I'm a little bit more, I'm concerned because I don't want to see Ukrainian factories and the workers inside of it getting killed. But from a risk perspective as an investor, I'm less concerned.
To your point about, you know, things actually being in the cloud, the biggest vulnerability actually then becomes people. And yes, there are issues around, it was like, you know, electricity connection, things like that. But very early on, actually, most Ukrainian tech companies adapted very quickly. You know, there was a strange sort of situation where COVID in some ways prepared everybody for remote work very quickly. And so when things happened here, there was actually every single tech company was able to absolutely maintain support, even if everybody was completely dispersed, because they had been dispersed over the last, you know, the previous 2 years beyond that. The issues with electricity, satellite connection, things like that, again, were addressed quite quickly. So, you know, from the outside investing in Ukrainian tech perspective, the risks have largely been mitigated in that context. And so, yes, I would agree that especially investing in technology right now is a much, you know, there's much lower risks than most people may perceive it to be from, you know, from the outside.
In the US, at least, I think it's less a question of people worrying about the risk and more them having absolutely no idea about the opportunity, right? There's always risk. Frankly, I mean, I think every professional exercise I've undertaken has had a considerable amount of risk associated with it, personally or professionally. And it's about risk. It's about understanding your risks and mitigating your risks,
And the balance.
and understanding the benefit, right? The risk versus gain calculation. And here, the gain, right? Like it's the reason why we call our venture green flags, right? Because when I look at Ukraine and I see the opportunities, all I see, every point of fact that I consider or that we consider as saying, well, have we thought about X? And you think about it and you're like, yeah, that's a green flag, right? Like the indicators are present for probability of success if you bring the right recipe and the right team to the problem. And I felt early on, and especially when getting together with Deborah on this, that we have the precise team and access and experience that is needed to address this issue, to bring foreign direct investment into the technology ecosystem and to help those companies, you know, get out into the West.
Yeah, that's actually another important point in terms of the sort of the relationship. It's not just bringing, you know, investment into Ukraine for Ukrainian companies. It's also helping them sort of build and then reach back out to the outside. And that's actually another piece that we feel very strongly about in the context of helping companies either find advisors, mentors, new client bases, do outreach, things like that to, you know, their companies target, you know, wherever it is, you know, in the West or beyond, kind of thing. So it's actually sort of the flow both ways that we are sort of seeking to facilitate, and that where we see this opportunity to really help with growth, because we can sort of do it both ways.
Can you tell more details about all these advantages, gains that you see, opportunities that you see here? Because we often hear in informational space internationally that, okay, let's build a plan for investing in Ukraine after the victory. But no one knows when the victory comes. Of course, it will come. We know it from our paper, but no one knows when it will happen. And what would you tell to those people who are still thinking, should they go and help beyond just humanitarian things?
If I could respond immediately to your question, I want to challenge the words that you used in your question, because you described victory as something that's just going to show up and knock on the door. It's something that you take. It's something that you make happen. So you'll be victorious because you choose to be, and because you put your back into it and you fight. And that's one of the most impressive, amazing things that you just feel when you're here, right? In the U.S., the media, if it leads, it bleeds, right? Is the old saying, right? So what do you see on the news? You see a bombed out building. You see, it plays into the tropes, the storyline of a broken Eastern Europe that was cut off from the Soviet Empire, but is still sort of hanging, right? It never became a fully fledged thing. And that's, I'm not going to name other countries in Eastern Europe, but I lived in Germany for 5 years, spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, had never made it to Ukraine. And those places are very different from, this is not Bulgaria, this is not Romania, it's very different. And it's far more aligned culturally and in every other important, measurable way to the United States than really anywhere else I've ever been. And another green flag, right? And then so you start doing your research, and this is what led us to do this. Ukraine is ranked, one report I read, Ukraine is ranked number 4 in the world in aggregate natural resources, right? Mm-hmm. You have an abundance of things that would make the Russians want to come and take them, right? I mean, nobody is taking seriously the argument that they were here to denazify the country, right? So why are they here? Is it because Putin is obsessed with reconstituting the Soviet Empire? Maybe. Is it because this is where all of the resources are and the people, and because it was the last opportunity they had to come and try and do this, not knowing that they missed their window, right? I think Americans don't appreciate that. Let's say we stopped supporting you and somehow the Russians managed to get past your defenses, which you would not be giving up. They're never going to control this city or any city in this country, right? Now you want to talk about Kosovo. Now we're talking about decades of, street fighting where it's going to resemble more like, Northern Ireland in the late 70s and early 80s than anywhere else on the earth. They don't have the manpower, much less the firepower, to come and take something like this. So it's not a realistic scenario where there's a victory for Russia. But there is a scenario where it's just dragged out and damages the ecosystem here, the economic opportunities here. And we want to protect those because they're worth a lot.
Great.
Also, just as to the why now versus why later, in terms of it, as I mentioned before, the fact that I've been here for a number of years, I have, again, slightly different context and views, and I have never doubted that Ukraine was on its way to being an extraordinary, economic powerhouse. It was a matter of when. Even as recently as, say, 2014, up until 2014, there were still huge amounts of kind of the old structure that was within so many different elements of the government, of bureaucracies, of systems. And in some ways, it was the sort of 2014 where the growth in this country began to hyper accelerate. And I'll just give you a crazy example. When Ukrainians first had access to Schengen visas, when people were easily able to start traveling to Europe, and I'm not kidding you, I could see within about a 6-month period how people's travels to Europe, they were coming back and they picked up new ideas. And I saw new coffee shops popping up. I saw new boutiques popping up. All of a sudden, I realized that a door had been opened for the Ukrainians. They were able to travel. They came back and they did it here, and they did it better. There were so many fantastic restaurants that started popping up all over the place. And so all that needed to happen, and with this particular piece, just the ability to travel. This is an extraordinarily entrepreneurial country. And once people have an idea, they figure out how to make it work here. So I have kind of seen this arc. So I have sort of never, again, to the point, doubted that there was not going to be an economic sort of boom. It's just kind of a question of when. I have to say, one of the things that was a little bit difficult for me, I think Ukrainians actually often doubted themselves much more than I ever doubted them. I really think sometimes there's this narrative that is going on here that, well, we hadn't necessarily done it before in the past. Can we do it in the future? But that's sort of a false narrative, because actually when you stand on the outside and look, it's all over the place and in almost every sector. So to the context of the why now versus the later, the first and foremost thing is that there's just so much going on right now. There is a tremendous amount of energy. There is such a passion and a will to keep moving forward, despite what's happening out in the West. And I think it almost sort of balances itself in the context of, how many of our soldiers are and have been out on the front. And for those who are not on the front, feel a really strong moral, cultural, social, personal imperative to be doing something in the non-battle zones. And actually what a lot of that's being translated into is the economic sector. And it is, if they are protecting Russia or protecting Ukraine from Russia right now on the front, what many, many other people are doing is building Ukraine's future going back to the West. And so it's happening, whether somebody on the outside sees it or not. That's actually always been a challenge with it's so hard from the outside to see what's happening in a, if you are not there. So one thing I would say, and actually we even just saw it this week, we had brought a number of Western speakers into Ukraine to speak at IT Arena. We had sort of facilitated, IT Arena paid for it and supported them and did everything, but we had just sort of facilitated some of the introductions. To a person, all of them said, I had no idea what it would be like. And they have all been extremely moved by the people they've met, the stories they've heard, how modern, great food, that it's a normal, lovely city that is happening in Lviv right now. And Andrew, who was here before, the air alarm went off yesterday, and he talked about how, there was a little bit of a reaction to it, but that most people understand, okay, the alarm goes off, you check your phone, what's the actual immediate threat? Okay, make a decision, you just keep going on with your life. It is not panic, it's not massive disruption. Like, everybody has just figured out how to adapt and to keep moving forward. And it's really important for the fact that things are just going forward economically as well.
Thank you for that. That means that your main advice is to come here and just see and feel it.
It is. It's an incredibly, it's such a different way of perceiving anything. And it's true for any country. You can look at pictures online and see it, but there is something that is really unique about Ukraine. And you touched on it, that I think especially Americans sometimes kind of lump the whole Eastern European bloc together.
I did.
And there's no differentiation, but Ukraine is, and again, this is exactly what you said, Ukraine is so extraordinarily different for a whole host of reasons than any of the surrounding countries. And it is when people come here and see the architecture, talk to people, on the street, engage, with conversations with people in restaurants, taste the food, see what's happening here, is when it's like their eyes are opened. And I have seen this going as far back as when we working with Ukraine Invest. One of the big things we really tried to do was just get people to come to the country, because you almost don't have to sell it once people are here. And I am not kidding you. All you have to do is get people in country, and whether it's in ag, manufacturing, tech, whatever, they understand. It's so hard to articulate, from far, particularly when you have screaming headlines of, all the horrific things that the Russians are doing. But when you're here, you really understand life is carrying on in so many different ways. And, it's that part of the population that feels, the obligation to the people who are fighting on the front, that's what they're doing. And it's unbelievable to watch, and it is actually a privilege to be here, to understand how much this society kind of works together in these balancing ways. And it is absolutely part of why I am very confident in, the future of where this country is going.
Since, I came for 3 weeks last spring, right? I came back again with this thesis in mind a month and a half ago. And if you come here and you don't immediately or near immediately recognize the entrepreneurial spirit in the people, and specifically in the founders who are putting companies together trying to solve really hard problems, then you don't know how to recognize an entrepreneurial spirit. It's extremely strong here. And I recognize it because even putting an investor hat aside, as a founder and somebody who came up through the startup ecosystem, right, with next to no connections at the beginning, and it's, you know it when you see it. And there are so many people I've met, and they're not even just founders. We've sat with, I don't know how many deputy ministers or, chiefs of staff, or folks who are in senior roles where if you were to go to many countries, why do they have that role? Oh, because, their uncle got them that role, or because it was a cushy government job to have. Did they care about the outcome and the responsibilities that they had? No. Why? Are they bad people? Not necessarily. It never even occurred to them that they should care, right? That's not what they're there for. It's just a job. But here, people have a sense of mission and duty and purpose, and maybe I'm just biased because those are the things that I look for when I'm assessing a person's character in many ways. But it's also those are also elements that I look for when I would be deciding whether to hire someone for my startup or recommend them for someone else's startup, right? And when you're sitting in Ukraine, in Kyiv, having lunch with a deputy minister who pulls out a binder, and he's like, here's 2 problems I'm thinking of right now. Here's a couple of solutions. What do you think? Yeah, you don't get that many other places. So it's clear that even if you don't, right? Even if you don't know the exact path you're going to take, you damn well better know how to navigate and be good at it. And then it's less important if you know the path you're going to take, because you'll find the path or you'll make the path. But if you're not somebody who, there are countries in Europe where if you order a small coffee, but you ask for a medium cup because you want to take your drink on the road, the smoke will start coming out of their ears. Well, I'm sorry, a small coffee comes in a small cup. It's but here it's just okay, what's the problem? Let's write it down, let's solve it, let's move forward. And it's just, it's relatable to me. And as an investor who's, taking off my hat of believing in, not taking it off, but putting on a separate hat on top of that hat for the moment, our job is to look for investable opportunities where we have reasons to believe that that company is going to succeed. And in early stage, and really in everything in life, but especially in early stage tech, it's all about the team, and it's about their motivation and why are they doing this? Because no startup pushes a product out the back end that looks like the product that they started with, right? It's an innovative process. It's an iterative process. You're learning and you're teaching as you go. And if you don't have that mindset, you're not going to produce companies or teams that will succeed.
Speaking about teams, businesses need not only great founders, they also need good employees. Do you see, because there were different conversations even in Lviv IT Arena yesterday at your panel, and today with the panel was Taraskits May. So some people say that, okay, we will hire because we have so many refugees. We have 5 to 7 million refugees out of Ukraine. We are having more and more people with disabilities after the war, after the front line. Do you see this as a challenge? Because companies that are aimed at growing, of course, need more and more, and scaling need more and more people. Do you see this challenge in Ukraine? And because some people say, okay, yesterday at your panel, we will invite people from the US to come here as engineers.
I didn't like that question.
Yeah, that's why I asked you. Or today, Taraskits May from SoftServe says that, okay, those people who are now abroad, they will come and bring much more competences, and they will work even better for Ukraine, etc. What is your thinking about it? And do you see this as a challenge?
So I think there's actually a couple different things that are sort of within your question. So one, if you start with actually people who are coming back from the front and who have disabilities, actually I think the country as a whole, there has to be a solution. And there's sort of a moral and obligation in terms of helping people find ways to continue on with their lives after they come back from, a front, and particularly if they've been injured, but before that they had been in farming and they can't do it anymore. There has to be some kind of a national way to address what this issue is going to be. So that is one piece. There's a lot of people that are actually talking about technology, trying to find ways for people who are coming back from the front to get involved in technology if they have not already. And in fact, cybersecurity is one of the areas they're specifically trying to get people to focus, because it is an area that around the world there is not enough people for it. And so the thought is, if you can train enough people in cybersecurity here, you can do work remotely, it would actually sort of be a bridge between a problem and a solution and an opportunity. So there are discussions like that are already going on. As to the number of people outside of the country, I know there's a lot of angst and hand-wringing about whether people are going to come back or not. At the end of the day, everybody's going to make their own individual decisions. If you think about it, it's a lot of women and children who had left. They probably are not going to come back until, for the basis, safety of children, things like that, until there is safety and security. But there's a point at which it's not going to be the government's decision. There's really very little that a government can do to make people come back. So for me, it's kind of a funny dialogue, because people, if somebody is living in a situation where their child is secure, where they know they can get a good education, it's the things that you're drawn to, what you want for your family. And to figure out how to get them to come back, they will come back if the kind of the ground basics that they need are there. And so I think actually that is maybe a better place to focus, is making, focus on making Ukraine a place that people want to return to. So there's that piece of it, rather than the how do we draw them back. The economic opportunities or the challenges with building teams, quite frankly, that's actually not something I'm worried about. I know at any given, first of all, it is extremely important for the success of a startup to have a good and balanced team, and you don't just want the small, the smart engineers. You want your hackster, your hipster, hacker, hustler. It's your tech guy, it's your marketing guy, and it's your front guy who's out there selling and doing. I mean, any good company, startup particularly, needs kind of a balance of the skill sets, and it's very rare that it's one person who can do two of those, let alone three. But there is an enormous talent pool that is in Ukraine. It is dispersed right now. There's a lot of people who, have either left or are on the front line. So is it going to be as easy as it was before the war? Okay, maybe not quite as easy to fill a position, but does that mean it's going to be the issue going forward forever? No, absolutely not. I'm not worried about that at all. And you also said one other thing about when people come back, they're going to come back with different skills and different experiences. I think that that's a brilliant thing. And to my point earlier, what I was talking about, when Ukrainians had access to go travel, through Schengen zone without all of the nightmares of the visas that everybody had to go through, people went out, had new experiences, and came back with a wave of new businesses. So I actually suspect that is far more likely what is going to come back. And it's also with new attitudes. It's about customer service. It's about doing outreach. It's new ideas for how do you build the client base? How do you do outreach? So I don't see the fact that people have had to leave as something that is going to be a long-term burden for the economy. I think we can get together in 3 or 4 years and talk about it once, when the war ends and there's been some time for things to resettle. I will happily come back and have you challenge me on that. And I'm going to bet that I am right, that the time out to coming back was a tremendous benefit.
Can I answer that question as well? When I first was doing the research, and after I came back and I said, okay, this was a profound experience for me personally, does that mean it has to become a professional experience for me personally, right? And so I wrote down, what is it that I would hope to accomplish? I wrote down, in 2 years, if I'm sitting in a restaurant in Kiev with a partner who I hadn't met Deb yet, and a team, what are we celebrating, right? Like, what are our big successes in the last 2 years? Trying to get another way to, what are we trying to achieve? And then I wrote down all of the reasons why I wouldn't want to do this, or why this would not be a smart decision personally or professionally. And those were the red flags, right? And then I went through each of them over time to understand them, and they flipped most of them to green. And I was very careful to be, starting a venture investment firm is a 10-year commitment at a minimum, right? You're taking money from investors, you are pledging, you are committing yourself, you are on a mission to return a multiple of that, ideally a significant multiple of what they put in. And so you want to make sure that you're in that for the long run and that you've made a solid decision. So having made plenty of mistakes in the past, I wanted to make sure to avoid as many of them as I could. And looking at talent flight was certainly one of those. And I don't know where the statistics lie now, but a year ago, something like 82 or 86% of people who had left had returned. And people don't understand, certainly in the United States, that Ukraine during the era of the Soviet Union was the intellectual center of the entire empire. And even before that, if you understand history, it was also the social and political and economic center of the Soviet Empire, and in fact the capital of what was conceptually then Soviet Union, right, before it was Moscow or St. Petersburg. And there are so many universities in this country and that are kicking out, I think, quote me on this because it's been a few weeks since I looked at the number, but I think it's like 50,000 new highly qualified personnel in information technology every year. And the size of your population, even if those people never come back, you will have replaced them in like 5 or 6, 10 years or something like that. And you will, by the way, have passed Israel in raw numbers of highly qualified IT personnel in like 6 years or something like that, from when I was looking at the numbers. So I'm less concerned about flight. I don't blame somebody for taking advantage of a bad situation to make their lives better. And I don't put a demand on them to return home. But I'm also not Ukrainian. It's not my place to really even have an opinion on that. But there are enough people here who have stayed and enough obvious indicators to me that the country is going to do nothing but grow and evolve, that I would be okay with that diaspora, knowing that they're still in their hearts Ukrainian and they still care very much for the country and will do what they can to support it. It's not like they left because they don't want anything to do with this place.
Can you share in more details your plan for the nearest future for a green flag venture in Ukraine?
You can absolutely.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So Green Flag Ventures, we're a venture capital firm based in both Los Angeles and in Kyiv, where Deborah lives. We invest in early stage Ukrainian tech companies, specifically targeting dual use, so capabilities which have a commercial and a military application, cybersecurity, AI and ML, fintech, and I worry a little bit that we're spreading ourselves too thin on this one, but I'd really like us to also include climate and green energy when we find the right companies, because how can you not? Like, it's the biggest problem facing the earth. You don't have to like it for it to be true. So I would like to make meaningful steps towards that. And so our intent is to invest in on the order of 12 to 15 or 20 Ukrainian businesses over the next 3 to 5 years and help them grow. And one of the things that is several of the green flags that make us believe that we're best suited to do this and that the opportunity is there is, my experience or our collective experience in US government selling into large commercial industry in the United States, my relationship with the tech ecosystem, and the fact that as a founder and somebody who has supported the ecosystem for years, there are a lot of folks out there who are willing to help and who are looking for innovative solutions to their problems. And if we can bring those things from here to the West, there's been more than a 50% drop in foreign direct investment into Ukraine since the war started. But the tech ecosystem has grown more than 24%, which, by the way, is not only impressive by itself, but you also have to consider it was growing 30% year over year for like the 7 or 8 years prior to that. It is on fire. It needs access to the markets. These founders need help reaching buyers, and they need help with their pitches. But you can teach somebody how to pitch their product. You can't teach somebody how to be innovative. And so what I see are tons and tons of innovative people who are building products and products that they haven't even thought of yet. And it's a phenomenal opportunity for us to not only do really well by helping these companies grow through exposure to the markets, but to do the right thing.
And Deborah's experience with Ukrainian startup ecosystem might be also quite helpful here, as I understand.
Yeah, Justin and I sort of balance each other very well in terms of the different skills and the different bases of contacts and things that we have. And so just exactly the last 6 years, specifically within the ecosystem, I've actually got a pretty good understanding of figuring out who's out there looking for sort of the very specific opportunities that we're going to be looking for, and being able to do the quick evaluation, quick understanding, and then running it through kind of the normal process of evaluating a startup just like anybody would.
I've been fortunate, as a founder, to have investors who are very supportive, and they help in ways that they promised that they would. Many founders out there who take capital from an investor, it's just money. It's dumb money. They don't provide any support. And that's not what we want to do. And that's not where we can help the most. So it's not just the capital, it's the capital plus all of the value that we're bringing. And that's why we're so confident we're going to succeed here.
I think that's a perfect ending of our conversation. And I'm so thankful for you to this positive view, extremely positive view in this tough time. I think this is something that's inspiring, not only for international audience, but also for Ukrainians who sometimes think in this world that, we see so many bad things happening, but we every day, and thanks to this helicopter view, we can see much broader our future. Thank you for that, and thank you, and have a great time.
Thank you so much for letting us join you.